Hello, everyone. This is John Salmon. I'm a technology partner at Hogan Lovells, and I lead our global blockchain group. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by an expert panel to discuss insurance and blockchain. So welcome to Oliver Volk, who's a blockchain expert and B3I representative of Allianz, Richard Phipps, who's a finance project manager at Swiss Re, and Ranveer Sagu, who's the CEO at Blocksure. Today we're going to be discussing some of the kind of key developments, the opportunities, and some of the challenges around blockchain as it applies to insurance. We will be live tweeting the seminar, so you can join in the conversation using the hashtag InsurTech webinar. That's with no spaces and no E after insure, because I know that people spell this differently. And if you have any questions during the presentation, you can send them to us using the Ask a Question on your screen, and we will be picking them up after our initial discussion for the next 30 minutes or so. So let's get going, I guess, with the panel discussion. So the first question, and perhaps, Oliver, if you could kick this off, what do you see as the most exciting developments in blockchain and insurance at the moment?
Yeah, thank you very much, John. Well, there are different developments. One we just internally talked about that we are kind of moving to a next step in the blockchain ecosystem development, more into the prototype use cases and more into the applications which will be really used and rolled out. There was lately a survey from a consultancy saying that there had been 26,000 blockchain use cases worldwide in the year 2016, and half of this year there already had been 25,000. Big numbers are not always a guarantee for productive benefits or productive results, but it shows that things are really moving on. In terms of regulation, there are also some discussions with the legal guys, you know that the best, and with the regulators. Their main problem, so to say, still is, as we do not have that many use cases, we still talk in theory about certain things, but the devil is in the detail, and if we have things up and running, there will for sure be issues which we haven't yet thought about or couldn't really assess. So this is something which will come up with those new implementations and applications, and I'm really looking forward to that next stage of the development within the blockchain ecosystem.
Thanks, Oliver. Could you maybe also just tell us a bit, I know that you're the Allianz representative on B3I. Do you want to just tell it, is there something you can tell us about where B3I is and your latest developments there?
Yeah, sure. Like B3I is the leading initiative for the insurance and reinsurance industry. The abbreviation stands for B like blockchain and the 3 I's Insurance Industry Initiative. It initially was founded by 5 of the leading insurers and reinsurers. We now grew up to 38, including brokers. So we are covering the majority of the market share of insurance and reinsurers. We produced a prototype which helps us to set a standard for a contractual management part of the process which already exists. So we used it to automate existing processes which are still very paper intensive, very much administrative workload prone, and we do need much reconciliation, which could all be brought more efficient with blockchain technology and single version of truth. This was presented this year at the Monte Carlo Rendezvous. That's the leading event for the reinsurance community. And we're now testing the prototype and trying to extend, and the major next step will be the establishing of an own legal body. For the time being, all the participants of the initiative are working together on basis of a memorandum of understanding, which is more like a loose framework. But like I said, beginning of next year, that's the next milestone. We want to set up an own legal body and staff that legal body with own people who are 100% dedicated to work on other use cases and existing use cases, and we are going to invest that. So maybe that also will be an investment opportunity for some of the attendees.
Great. Thank you very much. Richard, can we go to you and just ask the same question? What you see as the most exciting developments in blockchain and insurance, and maybe some of the developments you're seeing in B3I as well, because I know you're also involved in that too.
Sure. Thanks, John. I sort of see three areas for excitement with the current situation with blockchain and insurance, and I think starting with really where we position the B3I use case. But if I look a bit wider across the insurance value chain, right from the insured through insurers, reinsurers, and onto capital markets, I see a number of use cases or many use cases happening across that whole value chain. And if we then take B3I in the sort of center of that value chain and connecting insurers with reinsurers, for example, I think it's a really critical development in that area. But what I also see exciting is that's a sort of enabler for the pieces that are happening then either side of our particular use case for B3I. So whether that be with primary insurers, commercial insurers, and then on the other side of the process, also with sort of cat bonds and ILS area, for example, where there are a number of industry players are working on projects in these spaces. The kind of starting point for my kind of optimism at this stage. I think secondly, just in the past weeks and perhaps last few months, I start to see that more of our sort of operational staff within our own firm and other firms are getting involved with this topic. So it's moved over the past 6 to 12 months. It's now moved towards really the operational teams rather than being something that's stuck away with an innovation team. So that's quite exciting. And I've been having conversations in the past week with sort of senior actuarial colleagues who are saying they want to know more about this and how it's going to impact their operations, which is good. And then lastly, I think in the technology space, I'm not wanting to sort of labour technology too much, but I'm seeing that what we have now is a sort of business use cases driving some of the technology advances as well. So I think if you take technology on itself and then the various platforms available, they're only really going to develop if we have suitable use cases. And so now we see, for example, B3I and its use cases feeding into the Hyperledger development through our work with IBM. And that feels really quite tangible when you see features coming in the next versions of software, which actually are a result of work done on the sort of functional business side.
Great. Thank you very much, Richard. So, Ranveer, what's your kind of take on it from Blockshire's perspective?
So for me, it's we've got a different sort of way of setting it about to how the consortia have done it. We sort of said, right, can we improve the end-to-end value chain for insurance from when a customer puts a piece of data in and transfer that all the way across? And I think sort of Richard alluded to that a little bit. But then we said, how can you improve the customer experience? And we've got some projects with a number of brokers which should go live in the first quarter of next year. And that's what I see as being really exciting, that there'll be actual production systems out there so people can say, if you're interested in blockchain, you can see how it works and how it improves the process for the industry. But if you're not, what it allows you to deliver is sort of products in a different way. So we can start moving away from annual products, which are sort of fairly standard, etc. And you can say, well, blockchain delivers so much benefit and the cost savings are so great, and it allows you to change information on a policy regularly. So on-demand sharing economy products become much more realistic. We were having conversations with a couple of micro-insurance providers because they've always struggled with delivering low-cost administration delivery platforms, and we found a couple of areas there where people really want to look at how blockchain can deliver that for them. So I think for me the exciting bit is it changes how insurance can be delivered for a customer, but we now have a mechanism for delivering that at the right cost base so that all of a sudden people start thinking differently about the products that they deliver, and how they operate and what do you really need in a back office, and some of the processes at the moment that causes pain points like board row processing and splitting payments and the cash allocation, etc., will all be a thing of the past, and actually insurance then becomes more of a value add than with a lot of cost in the back. So for me, it's difference in customer delivery, the way products are built, but also removing a lot of the waste that there is in the insurance value chain. And some of the use cases we've had are things like on-demand sharing economy. And then we've said, look, there are sort of schemes-based, program-based businesses where brokers have small schemes but work in remote areas, and they're still using paper-based delivery to an insurer or an Excel spreadsheet, and you can get rid of all of that. But then we've taken it and we've got to look at life and health and simple life group schemes that can be done on this, employee benefit schemes. So there's a number of areas where you can apply blockchain technology and completely improve the processes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, all three. I think that's really helpful to kind of get an understanding of what we see as the kind of key developments and key opportunities. I mean, I think, people are excited about blockchain technology, and I know the four of us are very passionate about it, I think there's lots of people point out to the challenges, some of which I think are real and some of which are perhaps not so real. But what do you see as the, again, through that insurance lens, what do you see as the key remaining challenges for blockchain? So, thinking about possibly regulation, which was touched on by Oliver, responsibility, or is it just about getting people used to the idea of blockchain? I mean, Richard, do you want to maybe start off with you on that, please?
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's multiple challenges, to be fair, and perhaps I'll talk less about the regulatory aspect from my side, but I would acknowledge that. I think what I see, in particular, sort of working with my B3I hat on for a second, is the challenge of different market players and participants and their own particular priority. So from myself working for a reinsurer, we have a particular way of going about business, and so obviously when we go into some discussion about functionality, we inevitably wear our reinsurer hat, and so that's a particular challenge. How do we work together towards and not forgetting the sort of common aim, which is ultimately related to the end customer, as Andrea pointed out. But how do we then come to a consensus on what functionality to develop first, for example? So it's certainly a challenge. Market priorities. For sure, tech maturity is still an issue to be further advanced. I would note that there's few, if any, productive or true productive applications out there, blockchain applications in any industry. So why should insurance be any different in that respect? So I think there are certainly some challenges on tech side, although as I alluded to in my previous answer, that we're getting some good traction on that, working together with the vendors and getting open source like Hyperledger Fabric updated as we move forward. And then perhaps one last point before we hand it to somebody else would be certainly it's a little bit sometimes the elephant in the room alongside regulatory is sort of integration with existing systems, and so we have a challenge in that space, certainly not to be overlooked. And so from a B3I perspective on the integration topic, we certainly have a lot of activity going on in that space, and I think, technically I'd point to sort of the API approach for integration, which I think is kind of big theme in technology currently anyway. So, how do we integrate with existing systems? And indeed, not just how do we integrate, but perhaps even where do we draw the line with existing sort of policy admin system, for example, if I take B3I. So a number of challenges, but I think this is where some of the advantage of working in a collaboration actually it brings some real muscle to bear and some kind of really good alternative thoughts to develop a way forward.
Great, thank you, Richard. Ranveer, do you want to tackle that? question, please? Just what do you think?
So in terms of regulation, I don't really sort of worry about that too much. I mean, from a regulatory point of view, I say we've got to prove the technology can fit in with current regulation. So I don't spend a lot of time worrying about that. What I do is I say whatever we've got to build has got to fit with the current regulatory framework, because brokers and insurers and MGAs and anybody's got to work in that regulatory framework. What I think will happen is the regulatory framework will change once you start showing the benefits of what blockchain can bring. And you've got to build that in, so the security of customer data, client money rules, if we split payments at the beginning, and therefore a broker never takes client money and the insurer is the only person that can never touch it. Those kinds of things will improve. KYC with digital identities will become easier and automated. So, regulation will move, and that's the only way we can sort of work within the regulatory framework that will push regulation with the blockchain technology. I think the challenges for me are more around the industry and how they think and what they've got in place. So I was with a broker, a large, one of the world's biggest brokers, and one of their international executives, and trying to get people to sort of understand in that industry really what blockchain can deliver and what it can build around it is sometimes difficult. And the example was the person said, well, I've slimmed it down as much as I can, and it's really, really efficient. And then trying to convince him that actually by implementing a blockchain-based solution, you wouldn't have to have people there doing that. It just wasn't getting through, no matter how you explained it, because people have a tendency to then go, well, I don't understand blockchain and flick to that. So we've got to raise our awareness of the full capabilities of the technology and what it can do. And then I think it's the age-old challenge where I've been sat on the other side looking at insurance technology platforms, and somebody's come in with a really, really good platform, but I've already got technology in, and I don't want to risk what I do. And I don't want to risk any business streams, any income streams, or put anything at risk. So I go, okay, fine, we'll think about it, but you're not really going to do it. So what we've started doing is we said, well, we'll build new products that people find it difficult to build on their platform so people can understand the capabilities of the technology. And I think we're sort of in that process where we've got to educate industry on the full capabilities, but in a way that is easy for them to understand. And blockchain takes away a lot of the processing, a lot of inefficiencies come with it, but you can't demonstrate not doing something. So we've got to find sort of innovative ways to demonstrate how it works and what the full capabilities are. And for me, that seems to be the number one sort of priority for us here at Blockshield, but also for other people in the blockchain industry to say, you know what, it's so much better on a blockchain-based system. It's going to take a lot of time. We're at the beginning of the process, but how do we do that?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Thank you. Oliver, what's your take on it?
Well, there's not much left for me, but still, as Ranveer and Richard were very much focused on the operational issues, I will maybe tackle a little bit the general challenges I see. And to picture the first time, I would step half a step back to again, a little bit explain the basics so that everyone is on the same page. We are talking about blockchain technology, but I hope everyone is aware of their different blockchain technologies, and I usually describe it with the analogy of a smartphone. So each and every one of us has a smartphone with different apps, and they are running on either Android, iOS, or other operating systems. And those applications for blockchain technology we are talking about, those are the apps on your iPhone or on your smartphone, and the underlying operating system, that's the blockchain technology. And comparable to the smartphone, there are different operating systems, like different blockchain technologies. The one with everything which started was the Bitcoin blockchain technology, but two just recently were developed, which is like Corda and Hyperledger Fabric, and that brings us to one of the main challenges. Those new technologies, like those two blockchain technologies, only had been invented 2 or 3 years ago. They are still not very major. It's like we are working on a MS-DOS level, and we're now working with Windows 10 and other operating systems. So there still is some way to go, but there are very high expectations on applications we can think of. But sometimes the underlying blockchain technology cannot provide all the needs or the prerequisites for those applications in terms of security, in terms of scalability. And there are different blockchain technologies which have different advantages and disadvantages depending on how and where you need it. So that's one general issue where really people have to spend some work on, and some of those blockchain technologies are owned by a community or like open source software. So this is something where we can expect major developments in the near future. The other topic is a main challenge, which more lies again on the operational level. It's difficult to get the business on board in some cases, because what we do with those blockchain use cases is that we blockchain a very, very small part of a process. We call it a minimum viable product, which shows how blockchain technology works, and we can make experiences. But very often for the business, it's something where the business say, well, yeah, that's nice, but that's not really solving our highly complicated, sophisticated problem. So if you really have the solution, then come back and show me blockchain as an alternative. So we do need businesses who are supporting the technology to be developed, and who are not deciding whether do we have a up and running product, then we use it. If not, then not. At least from my perspective, how I see it in our insurance area. But not only talking about challenges, we also have success stories, and the initiative B3I, and there are other initiatives in other industry. This is for sure a success story, because there are the market leaders, which are competitors who cooperating on a new technology, who are developing something which will help to make processes and relationships between companies in a certain industry more efficient. So that will be a standard for whole industry rather than a competitive advantage for a single player. So single players are still working on blockchain solutions to get a competitive advantage, but that cooperation level within the community, that's for sure a success. And I think that only could be able to happen as the blockchain technology is a technology where everyone knows this is something which is not driven by someone or by a certain party, but this helps to bring people together and to start initiatives, because it's independent and each and every one can and has to use it with the same terms and conditions.
Great. Thank you very much. Again, all three. That was really, really helpful. I mean, one of the things we've talked about BTI quite a lot, and I just want to. I mean, there's quite a lot of collaboration in blockchain with BCI and insurance particularly, but there's also R3 and there are other consortia. And I think, as someone said, blockchain is not the sort of thing that you can do on your own and have fun, really. So, what's your, just Ranveer, maybe starting with you, what do you see as maybe the advantages or challenges about doing things through some sort of consortia, or where do you see collaboration coming in, and how do you see that going in blockchain?
Well, you can't make it work without collaboration. So that for me is taken as a given. It just depends on the size of collaboration and how you do that. So B3I, R3 are large collaborations and they're delivering real value. We work with brokers and insurers. Now, because I spent so long in the insurance industry, what we're doing is we're finding products that brokers want, and then we're sort of also going to insurers who are interested in working with us, and we're putting those together. So in a roundabout way, it's a collaboration, but it's just along a product line. So the broker, the insurer, we've now even got a TPA at the back end that wants to get involved. So we're creating like a mono product line collaboration, because they can see the competitive advantage it brings to them, and they can also understand how it works, the underlying technology, and then they can work through some of the issues. And some of the issues they have to work through is the broker looking at, well, I've got a 3-month policy, but all I care about is a commission and earning on that. And then the insurer is going to the finance department saying, how do we now account for 3-month policy in our systems, which are on 12-month policies? And when we sit down and do our product build meetings, the broker, the insurer, the TPA and us, we all have to sit together and we have to collaborate on designing new process, etc. It doesn't work standalone, but it just depends on the size of collaboration. So for me, it has to be a collaboration to make it work. And it just depends on the scale of it.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Richard?
Yeah, interesting. I think the first thing I noted down actually when I was just thinking about this before, that collaboration doesn't come for free, and I think I mentioned a bit earlier, which you've got to work at that, and that takes both logistic power and also the change management skills, if you like, to work together. We bring together quite different cultures, but I think equally on the positive side, insurance is a business where wide collaboration is required often. There are policies that have 20, 30 different participants on them. So, hence we're quite used as a business to having a sort of a business level working together. I think perhaps operationally this is something that we'll see more of on an operational level, working together towards a common aim. Something I find interesting around collaboration as well is I think Ranveer picked up on it earlier, sort of the need to challenge the status quo. Maybe an obvious statement, but really, because we've done something like that for a long time and we've worked on it together, doesn't mean to say that it's the best way of doing things with the current or the new technology toolkit that we have available. So really being able to challenge both the existing process and also, if we look ahead, how the insurance industry is likely to change as we look ahead at the kind of advent of more big data, for example, as we get into Internet of Things, and also serving the needs of kind of like the more micro-insurance space. So I think if we think about needing to work together towards a sort of common aim there, I feel like we're in a good space working on this at this point, rather than sort of being late into this as an industry. I think just one other note on participation and collaboration, and again, apologies for bringing up BCI in this regard, but it's been great to have in the recent market testing activities. We had 38 insurers, brokers, and reinsurers working together with that testing. And they're represented across really all of the continents except for South America. So we have, I think, at least 15 countries represented. And, that's certainly an exciting space to be in.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Oliver, you got anything else to add on this one?
No, well, I think I started to kick off the cooperation topic, and maybe to just give one view on the insurance industry and blockchain again, as this is the title of the webinar. To be honest, insurance never was supposed to be very innovative, and we have processes which are far away from automation. But in turn, this brings a very high potential to apply new technologies like blockchain, and I see blockchain as a technology in terms of digitalization. A couple of years ago, we would have called it automation, but now it's digitalization. But this is something which is different in certain other industry where the process of automation is probably a little bit further along the road, but we can tackle this with blockchain technology to use it for automation very good. For the time being, we concentrate more on the improvement of existing processes, and as Richard mentioned, it's supposed to be as disruptive too. So in future, it might affect the value chain in a way that I would see that the value chain which starts at the policy holder, and the insurance industry goes to a primary insurer, then to a reinsurer, and to another reinsurer, which is then a retrocessionaire. This value chain might still be existing, but it might not be in the hand of different insurers, because processes which can be automated will be automated, and we have to make sure and understand that in the end we have to concentrate as an insurer on those areas where we see our unique selling proposition, where we see we have a real benefit in terms of maybe premium calculation, maybe claims handling. But this will be, from my point of view, in future, a service we will provide to value chain, which will be then driven by maybe peer-to-peer or some other initiatives. But that will for sure change in future.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think that's a really good time to take some questions from the audience. Now, we have a number already, which is some really interesting ones. But if there are people online and they haven't already submitted the questions, please do so using the Q&A chat. So just going through them, I mean, I think we've probably answered some of these. So someone's asked a question: how do you expect blockchain to expand around the world, especially considering that insurance is a global matter? I don't know if they're talking about regulatory regime or just more generally. Does anyone want to give that one a go? Or should we just say, well, inherently we are expecting it to be global because that's the whole idea behind decentralization?
Yes, I would say that. I think your point, John, on the regulatory side of things is quite interesting, and one which perhaps I have not great experience with, but I know of the various sandboxes that the regulators have around the world. I'd be interested to know if any of those regulators are working together for sort of some kind of combined sandbox approach. Maybe that's too controversial, but it's certainly an area that needs further development.
Well, I think regulators do see, in some senses, I think regulators see there being some regulatory arbitrage around this. You know, you've seen places like Gibraltar and Malta looking at making themselves very attractive to blockchain. But we ran a conference in New York a couple of weeks ago where the regulators were all not, fair to say, they weren't terribly keen on the idea of a sandbox in the US. And nor did they, I think, feel the need to do so. They really weren't very warm to it at all, whereas, you know, in the UK, we're very used to the sandbox, and I know many other countries are in the throes of having a sandbox or looking at a sandbox, and I think certainly there's been a lot of blockchain use in the UK sandbox.
John?
Just on that, John, go on, Randy.
John, I was just going to say, I'm not going to predict, it's difficult to predict how it's going to expand around the world, but I think there's some things we've got to be very careful of, and there are certain things that it may allow us to do. So one of the things that we've got to be careful of is about interoperability, and we've got to make sure the customer, when they buy a policy, we don't get stuck in, is it on Hyperledger build, or is it in our Accorda build, or is it different blockchains, so people can't actually work together. So we've got to be careful of interoperability, and we've got to make sure that the customer's protected and all that kind of stuff. So those things have still got to be there, and we've got to put that at the back of everything we do. But I think where it does allow us some interesting stuff is you can start thinking about global insurance products. And why do I have to buy travel insurance in the UK if I live in the UK when I may be able to get a better product from a Spanish insurer? And it may allow products to be distributed in a different way. So how it'll expand, I don't know. But I think we've got to be careful of certain things and making sure we can all work together in the industry, and that's where the collaboration is really important. But I think in some respects it could drive different products. So let's say a Spanish insurer says, you know what, I want to provide insurance, and I can provide it cheaper because I've got the capital to do that. So why don't I do that? Yeah. And the customer says, well, I'm quite happy to buy it because I know my claim's going to be paid. So I think it might start changing how we think about insurance and our geographic and regulatory boundaries.
I think that's right. I mean, you know, as you know, the regulators will, you know, so if a UK customer wants to buy it from a Spanish insurer, they would still have to be subject to UK insurance law and insurance regulation, which, you know, they may or may not find a challenge because it will be probably slightly different from what they're used to, but that's kind of a different point. So just turning to another question. So would implementing blockchain aid in cost reduction, more transparency, and reduce risks for crash for cash situations as smart contracts, for instance, will be able to trigger only once events occur? I don't know who wants to take that. Ranveer, do you want to maybe start with that?
Yeah, I think the cost reduction piece definitely, the transparency definitely, and that's just not to do with crash for cash, etc., and reduce risk. I think if somebody's going to commit fraud, they're going to find a way around it. What it can do is, if it's related to an identity and the system is set up in the right way, you should be able to do that. But if somebody comes in with one identity and they've created a number of identities and they still want to commit fraud, we've just got to get smarter around that. And it's like any system, it's only as good as it's set up. So the potential is there, but it's got to be structured in the right way. So and that's it really. But in the cost reduction, the transparency, much better.
Okay. So the next question we've got here is, B3I initiative seeks to drive market standards. Do you think that current acceptance level of Accord standards by the market is sufficient? Oliver, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Well, one main prerequisite to use a blockchain solution for whatever business or process, if you have a certain community or certain piece of stakeholders, is that you do need a standard data language or a common data language, like, for example, the financial service industry did with the SWIFT standard. So what we did, without going into the details of the core, is that there's some agreement on a data language in terms of explanation for the different terms and expressions we have in terms of reinsurance business. That was something we used to have as an input for the prototype we built up. So there's a user interface which requires certain inputs, and these are named after the declaration we have in the Accord standard. But the system itself then will set up an industry standard technology-wise. So we have to differ between the data standard and then a technology standard. And of course, there might be the need for other standards if we then move to the primary insurer on the area of the brokers. But again, standard for me is always the key to prepare something which then can be blockchained or automated in another kind of way.
Okay, great. So the next question is from an old chum, David Edwards. If all the insurance parties are willing to collaborate, why not create a secure, centralized services, mainframes are good at this, that is available via APIs that everyone agrees to use? What do you see as the key advantage of blockchain technology over others in closed environment, brackets private, where there's already a large degree of trust between parties for insurance? Okay, that's a very difficult question. David, anybody want to take that one?
Difficult question from David, I have to say. I think my approach with this, so I'm also looking at various other use cases beyond B3I at Swiss, and certainly I go into those analyses looking at, could this be achieved by a traditional database structure, with a very keen eye. So I think that it's an important question to continue asking yourself. I think in respect of some of the use cases lend themselves more easily to, or more obviously to, a blockchain solution with regard to not having a third party kind of hosting all of your data for the whole industry, being able to run a query of it and take that away, and likewise perhaps the cost element of actually that third party needing to be involved in the first place, rather than having the existing market players effectively hosting their own data. So I think it's you end up fairly quickly into some lower level analysis, I think, on this question, and it's the right question to ask there, of course.
Okay.
This is Oliver. Maybe to to add from my side, and I think I mentioned it in one of my previous answers, that even if in an area where we have competitors in an industry trying to work together, there always will be the question if we will set up and stand up what kind of technology do we use, which kind of preferred provider we use. And with blockchain technology, this is on a level where everyone can be sure that no one has an advantage to use that technology, or who knows the one running that. So this is really in the end open source, or like in a very closed system. And of course there's trust and there are long-term relationships, but again, we are still competitors, and we have to make sure also from antitrust perspective that this is something where we have security, that things are like they are, and for all of them the same, and no one has an advantage over someone else. And I think blockchain technology, at least at this point, can provide that beyond other advantages that they might have for different applications. But this is something for me which is very important if you're talking about initiatives.
Yeah.
And if I sort of add a little bit more, I think there's two things for me. One is around cost and one is around data security. So somebody's got to manage that central service, so that's adding cost. And one of the things about blockchain is you don't need a central service. Everybody has their own version of the truth, data, and they can manage it however they want, but they don't have to contribute to the central service. And I think if I read underneath this question, there are already examples of this where that central service then gets changed from the original remit and actually ends up costing more. And then there's a bit about data security and storage. So if it's a central service and it's going to be one central data store, you have to build that in a way that there's full auditability and somebody's going to manage it. It becomes very complex. But with a database, somebody goes in and changes a figure, everybody then has that changed figure. And people may say, I saw a different number in there the other day or last week, but now it's changed. And then you've got to go through that reconciliation process where lots of people are going into a central service, getting the information saying, what is it that's different? And I think it's the complexity that central service adds and the cost that goes with it, for me, is why you use a blockchain application, because it takes all that away from it.
Okay. Right, I think we'll just deal with two kind of last questions quickly. So there's a question about how blockchain could handle personal health information, since information stored on blockchain is open to all, and also the emergence of things like GDPR. How could a blockchain network and architecture deal with protection of personal data in the insurance domain? So I'll use the moderator's privilege, I guess, and just start with that, given that's probably more my domain. I think, it was mentioned by many of the panelists earlier on, the different blockchain technologies will be subject to different regulatory regimes, and not all. There's two ways of dealing with this personal data issue. One is not all blockchain technologies will have all of the personal data open to all, and there are many different ways of skinning the cat. But I think it is important that you understand exactly how your underlying technology is going to represent data and figure out whether there's personal data, and that's not a 5-minute question often. The other thing, so I was presenting last night on digital health and using blockchain, and there are a number of applications where you may have some data on the blockchain and some data off-chain, particularly where it's very sensitive, such as health data, and that's an obvious way of doing it. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything to that.
I think it's absolutely right what you said there, because blockchain isn't just a standalone technology. You've got to use other things around it, other bits of technology, and you've got to put them in tandem. So what we said there, John, about what's on the chain, what's off chain, is really, really important, and how you structure that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the other thing is, there are certain, public blockchain systems that absolutely you can see potentially some data that could lead to identification of an individual. So it is personal data, but there's lots that mask that data. So it really does come down to understanding the system. So we've got 1 more minute to go. So I'd really just like to take the opportunity to thank the panelists very much. I've really enjoyed the discussion. So thank you, Richard, Oliver, and Ranveer. If you have any feedback on today's webinar or any recommendations for future webinars, please do complete this short survey at the end of this webinar. It will come up on your screen shortly. And finally, if you found this interesting and want some more thought leadership like this, please do visit the InsurTech community page, where you'll find recordings of webinars, articles, and interviews with global industry experts. So that's all from all of us. Thank you very much and goodbye.